Welcome back to Module 3, Submodule 2. We're about to start Lab 2B, Command Line Temperature and Humidity. It was originally called, Tell me the weather! I command you! But since we're not really focusing on sensing the weather, I figured I'd just use a straightforward name. In this second lab, we'll be creating commands that print out temperature and humidity. Now that we know how to access the sensor and read out its value, we can have specific commands to do that at will. This starts us down the path towards creating our application. The reason we want to create a command for temperature and humidity is so that we can test it out and make sure we know it's working and the output is what we expect. This will be another baby step we take towards creating our main application. Hopefully, it's starting to become more apparent why it's useful to have a command line we can work from. Once we have our read temperature and read humidity command, we can get a sensor reading whenever we want. This is especially useful in case we want to experiment with different sensor positions and locations. For this lab, we won't be learning any new functions. Instead, we'll be combining things we already know. By creating a command for reading temperature and one for humidity, we'll be setting ourselves up to both have a test program we can use later and also start combining our functions into an application. Now let's get into the code. First, we're going to start by including two libraries, the command Arduino library and the DHT sensor library. Once we do that, we once again create our DHT sensor object and specify the pin, A0, that we'll use to access it as well as the sensor type. In the setup, we call the DHT.begin function, and after that, the command.begin function with our baud rate. Then we print out our title so that we'll know what code we've loaded into the device. Finally, we create two commands, temp, which maps to command temperature, and humid, which maps to our command function, command humidity. These are our two functions we'll be calling from the command line to read out our temperature and humidity. In the loop function, we just poll the command line to see if any commands have been entered. If they have, we call their respective function. Now let's get to our command functions. We create our boilerplate command function code for command temperature. Inside it, we create a float variable and assign it to the return value of our read temperature function. Once we have the temperature, we print it out in a nice format. We're now going to do the same with the humidity. We create a float variable called humidity and assign it to the return value of our read humidity function. Once that's done, we print it out in a nicely formatted way. That's our program. Let's do a test compile to see if there are any errors. Now, let's upload it into our WildLogger board. We check to see if our settings are correct, and then start the upload. Now we can open up a serial terminal and access our two functions. You can see that it's currently 20 degrees Celsius, which is fairly pleasant, although a little on the cold side. There's also a 33% relative humidity, which is quite dry and makes sense since Japanese autumn tends to become dry. If you were here, you'd also be able to tell by looking at my hands. In this lab, we learned how to create a command that gives us temperature and humidity on command. This is another step towards building our WildLogger environmental data logging application. In the next lab, we're going to take the data from our sensor and use it to perform an action. Stay tuned for Lab 2C. It's getting hot.